Hello, everyone. I'm Harriet Von Wallace of WTN Tribune Radio. Welcome to our home studios based here in Nashville, Tennessee. We hope that your week will be filled with fun, entertainment, and information as we gather the tools to change the world of media one newspaper at a time. On behalf of our esteemed publishers, Rosetta Miller Perry of the Tennessee Tribune and Scott Davis of the Nashville Pride, we are excited to be your host, and we welcome you here to Nashville, Music City, Tennessee. In the past 25 years, it is hard to identify an individual in America who has fought as hard as the Reverend Edwin C. Sanders II to inform African Americans about the HIV/AIDS epidemic, which has devastated the Black community. The Metropolitan Interdenominational Church of Nashville, Tennessee, was founded in 1981, and from its inception, this congregation has attracted a broad cross-section of people, cutting across all the barriers that fragment and divide the body of Christ. This community of believers is known for being inclusive, reconciling, and engaged. Reverend Sanders, the senior servant and founder of the church, has said that Metropolitan has been called a lot of things: the AIDS church, the crack church, but one thing you won't hear being called is a church without compassion. That's because the Metropolitan Interdenominational Church of Nashville, Tennessee, welcomes all of God's children, and in the case of persons with AIDS, it means those dealing with the disease will always have a place to go for that much-needed support and social service. We push inclusion on all levels, said Reverend Sanders, and on the AIDS front, that inclusion began early in the 1980s when most of the world assumed this strange new disease was only a problem for white gay men. Not so, said Reverend Sanders. He went on to explain that near the beginning of the pandemic, one of the 12 founding members of Metropolitan died from an AIDS-related complication. This was the event that sparked the congregation's awareness of and commitment to addressing this epidemic. The prominent minister said that the church has too often allowed a person with HIV to be defined and driven out of the circle of Christian fellowship. While so many Black gay clergy have totally ignored or skirted this issue, Sanders has met it straight on.
HIV/AIDS ministry for us at Metropolitan Church began 25 years ago as a result of the death of one of our founding members. We have a biblical mandate to respond to those who are the disadvantaged, the disenfranchised, those who have been discounted and dismissed. It's not just the right thing to do politically, but it's the right thing to do spiritually. It's the right thing to do within the context of our faith traditions.
His ministries are the model for HIV/AIDS awareness and support worldwide, and his body of work in this area is unmatched, and therefore, Metropolitan has chosen to emphasize the whosoever in John 3:16 as a mandate for inclusion. It wasn't long before Reverend Sanders began to put together the pieces of a very, very deadly puzzle. He said, "It was clear to me that this was a disease that was going to impact the most vulnerable in our city, those that didn't have adequate health care, those in poverty, those lacking quality education. We also saw this as a disease transmitted through bodily fluids, so we knew those using drugs were at risk. We started talking about AIDS as a Black issue early on, and Metropolitan has been involved in HIV/AIDS ministry ever since." It was a disease that people didn't talk about. The silence that surrounds the virus is a theme that permeates all communities. And that's not just about the fact that people who have the virus are keeping silent, but it's also the silence of others unwilling to push the issue or to talk about it. Reverend Sanders pushes the issue and talks about it internationally. He said that Martin Luther King once said, "In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends." In 1992, Metropolitan organized the First Response Center, which houses the outreach ministries of the church. The center provides a wide range of HIV and substance abuse related services, including outreach, prevention, education and testing, risk reduction, counseling, HIV/AIDS support groups, case management, pastoral counseling and care, AIDS emergency fund, HIV/AIDS housing, substance abuse treatment, relapse prevention, transportation, nutritional assistance, mental health counseling, primary health care services for individuals living with HIV/AIDS, capacity building, and technical assistance to other organizations interested in implementing HIV prevention programs. The center primarily works with economically disadvantaged and marginalized individuals who are at risk of contracting HIV. People who use the services of the First Response Center are people who are less likely to know about other services in the community and have probably been unsuccessful in effectively assessing other human service organizations and/or medical care providers. The staff of the First Response Center makes approximately 5,000 outreach contacts a year and an ongoing basis services approximately 800 people through case management and other supportive services. In addition, the center has also been licensed to provide outpatient drugs. Other ministries of the First Response Center include Men of Faith, Men of Color, a program whose primary goal is reducing the transmission of HIV among gay and bisexual men through education, fellowship, and community service, and the Davidson County Harm Reduction Program, which takes aim at reducing the spread of AIDS among injection drug users. There's also the Dinah Project, dealing with sexual violence, or Parents Assisting Children to Achieve, a child advocacy program, and an alcohol and drug ministry. Let us not forget that every 10 minutes, someone in the United States contracts the AIDS virus, and half of them, are Black. 30 years after the AIDS virus was first reported among gay white men, nearly half of the 1 million people in the United States infected with HIV are Black men, women, and children, even though Blacks make up just 12.6% of the population. Let us also remember that the disease has also had an often overlooked impact on women. We must remember that women make up 2/3 of the people who contracted HIV through heterosexual sex. African American women and girls are disproportionately affected. Their rate of contracting HIV is 20 times higher than white women and girls. Now, arguably, HIV/AIDS is one of the most impactful issues facing our community. African Americans are contracting the virus at epidemic rates, and the National Newspaper Publishers Association, and chaired by the Honorable Clovis Campbell, is at the forefront by acknowledging this threat, disseminating information to its readers nationwide on a weekly basis. Rev Sanders is a national leader and has placed his standing as a religious leader on the line to fight against a disease that has targeted the Black community. His contributions have been recognized by the White House and in the world capitals. Perhaps the greatest evidence in his personal life to support his assertions is demonstrated by his appointment to the CDC Advisory Committee on HIV and STD Prevention during the Clinton administration, to the Presidential Advisory Council on HIV/AIDS by President Bush, serving 5 years during that administration, and currently he is involved with the Obama administration White House Office on AIDS in implementing the National AIDS Strategy. Rev Sanders' impact is not felt only here in Nashville, but globally. For 20 years, he has served on numerous national and international commissions and has become an expert on fighting the HIV/AIDS epidemic in our community. Rev Sanders was a presenter at the 1998 World's AIDS Conferences in Geneva, Switzerland, the World's AIDS Conferences in Durban, South Africa, and the 2006 World AIDS Conferences in Toronto, Canada, as well as speaking regularly at other forums and conferences throughout the United States and internationally. Finally, when the Obama administration released a 60-page HIV plan, it stated it would cut new infections by 25% by 2015 and getting 85% of people newly diagnosed into appropriate care within 3 months of diagnosis. Importantly, it codifies the fact that resources would be targeted where needs were most dire. Let us also not forget that African Americans now account for roughly half of new infections every year and roughly half of all people living with HIV/AIDS today. The plan reinforces the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's emphasis on getting more people tested to reduce infections. Rev Sanders serves on the boards of directors of the Black AIDS Institute, the AIDS Institute, the National Minority AIDS Council, the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice, and the Drug Policy Alliance. He is the National Coordinator for Religious Leaders for a More Just and Compassionate Drug Policy, and a former member of the National Advisory Council on Sexual Health at the National Center for Primary Care. More of his current commitments include serving on the advisory committee of the Rural Center for HIV/STD Prevention and as chair of the HIV Vaccine Trails Network Legacy Project Advisory Group, which is designed to increase the participation of African Americans and Latinos in HIV vaccine studies. In Nashville, Rev Sanders has made a difference in many capacities. His AIDS-related work with the Meharry Vanderbilt Alliance, which includes studies of disparities in the HIV epidemic and involvement with the pastoral counselor for the Meharry Medical College Alcohol and Drug Abuse Program, director of the Southern Prison Ministry, and dean of the chapel at Fisk University. He is also a member of the Alcohol and Drug Council of Middle Tennessee, the Nashville branch of the NAACP, as well as a former president of the Interdenominational Ministers Fellowship. Rev Sanders, a graduate of Wesleyan University, received a Bachelor of Arts degree in anthropology. He specialized in cultural anthropology, and his thesis was entitled "The Black Church as a Revolutionary Institution." Rev Sanders' professional life also began at Wesleyan as co-director of the African American Institute, and he is a former member of the Wesleyan University Board of Trustees. His graduate studies includes Yale and Vanderbilt University Divinity School. The opportunity to travel extensively throughout Europe and Africa was afforded Rev Sanders as one of the first fellows of the Thomas J. Watson Foundation. He is married to attorney Denise Billy Bowers Sanders and has 3 children. So Rev Sanders, on behalf of Carl B. Rodney, chairman of the National Newspaper Publishers Association Foundation, Clovis Campbell, chairman of the National Newspaper Publishers Association, and your Nashville host publishers, Rosetta Miller Perry of the Tennessee Tribune and Scott Davis of the Nashville Pride, thank you for your love, compassion, and tireless efforts in the HIV community, domestic and abroad.